Hello everyone, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping. I'm Tyler, your host, and in this video, we're going earthworm hunting. There will be graphic earthworm related footage, so if you're squeamish, well, you should probably go watch a video about cats or something. Hey, this guy's going for my worms. Get out of here. It's a harsh world out here. Yeah, go to someone else's yard. Alright, why am I collecting worms? It's not for fishing, although I've got plenty of worms if I do go fishing. I have a vermiculture setup, as some of you will have noticed. For those of you who have no clue about what that is, or for those of you who are still wondering why I'm doing it, we're going to talk about that while I look for these worms. So earthworms greatly increase the rate at which your composts, and I believe the productivity of that. They eat the composting food and the leaves and the things that you put in there, and well, arguably they may just be eating the bacteria or digesting the bacteria that is on that food, but either way they're speeding up the process at which your carrot slices and your eggshells and your leaves and all these different things that you throw in there, speeding up the process at which those things decompose. And it's an extremely efficient process. A pound of worms can probably eat their weight in food in a week. And I've probably got about, here we go. I haven't really been paying attention. Hello, little guy. I've probably got at least 10 pounds of worms in my buckets right now, if not twice that. It's really hard to gauge when you just go out all the time and pick worms. But they sure are eating a lot of vegetable scraps. Every time I go poke in there and see that everything's gone, it's pretty surprising how much they've eaten through. So what they do is they eat it and they poop out pretty much some of the most perfect organic fertilizer that you can have. I mean, that's just a pretty universally agreed upon fact among organic gardeners. And I'm not just trying to be like a hipster purist gardener here, because that's not what I am. I mean, I would like to be. And those are the people that I listen to and the information that I've ingested over the years. So that's why I'm doing this. This is something that I've learned about all my life. I did a elementary school and a high school project on vermiculture, just because it was a topic that was in front of me at some point. And I've just always been fascinated by it. I've mentioned before on my channel that earthworms are one of the prime architects of the world's environment. They're responsible largely for... I'm not paying much attention here. I should be collecting a lot more worms than I am, because they're everywhere. That's a dandelion. Unless I picked them all. I've already gotten many worms today. I'll show you. It was raining quite heavily earlier, and so I've been out here doing this for a while. Might have actually scared a lot of them underground. I'd say I've got close to a pound of worms right there, honestly. Anyways, I need to pay more attention. So earthworms are largely responsible for the few feet of topsoil that we have throughout most of the world that we rely on to grow all of our food. And we have to imitate that using chemical fertilizers, which arguably are not nearly as good as just having actual soil rather than dirt that you're pumping fertilizers through, and which really definitely is not sustainable. Maybe on the macro scale, but definitely not for us as individuals. Look at this guy. Bloop. Very nice. You and I cannot produce our own artificial fertilizers, and unless you have a pretty nice bat cave nearby with just piles of guano, which are probably illegal for you to just go harvest, even if it's on your private property, pretty sure that's a protected kind of thing. There's not many natural sources of high nitrogen fertilizer. Fish is a good one. So if you're collecting a lot of fish, yeah, that's actually probably one of the best arguments for fishing, because unless you're really good at fishing and you're just producing enough calories in fish to feed your family, which if you're in the right spot, like around here, definitely you can do that. But I think the crowd of people who say that fishing can be a life-sustaining practice for an entire family of people are either in the small percentage of elite fishers or in the large percentage of people who have no clue how hard it is to walk home with enough fish to feed 6 people every single day. If you can, please make videos about it, because I've never been able to just pull, pounds of fish out of the water every day reliably. But they produce good fertilizer for the garden that's going to produce a lot of food for you. So that's an argument. But worms do a really good job of producing prime fertilizer. Now, if you want high nitrogen or high whatever, you need to know what you're putting into it. And that's why it's a learning process. And that's why I'm doing that now. But it is a way to take the things that you have around you. And for one thing, it's a great way to get rid of a lot of your garbage. If you don't want to be sending things to the landfill now, and if later in a grid down situation you want to greatly reduce the amount of garbage you need to figure out what you're going to do with, earthworms are a great option, because they eat a huge chunk of your kitchen scraps, which are a fair chunk of your garbage output. And they'll eat a lot of your paper or cardboard scraps, depending on what those are. You don't want to feed them a lot of inky stuff. They actually just won't eat it, and you don't really want to go into your garden anyways. But plain brown cardboard, plain brown paper bags and things like that, they'll go in. So it actually is one of the best ways to upcycle things rather than just recycle or dispose of stuff. And you end up with a cycle of producing food and cycling it back directly into your food making process. Now, the cool thing about worms is they can take something that you want to compost and in a week or so turn it directly into fertilizer that you can go and put on your plants, or soak in water and spray on your plants as a water fertilizer. And I already have buckets that I can harvest right now and get worm castings out of. So it produces this really quick system of turning kitchen scraps into something you can put on your garden and not need to be constantly purchasing these store-bought fertilizers. Now, another fun thing about this is the fact that I was telling Anna about this. It's pretty fun for kids. Like what I'm doing right now, I'll just go out after a really rainy day, walk around with a little bucket, and spot earthworms. And very quickly, you end up with a little colony of worms that you want to go check up on and take care of and feed. And it's sort of fun knowing, oh, come with me. It's sort of fun knowing that at any time, gotcha. Any given point, you can be confident knowing that they're out back working away for you. So, even if you don't really feel like you need prime organic fertilizer, which I feel like you should, I think it's just a really good idea for practical reasons and just for educational reasons, with so many people having their kids at home, to be doing something, just growing a few things. Grow a sunflower. I mean, everybody can appreciate a sunflower. You don't even have to try to harvest the seeds, which I think will also be a pretty fun thing. But just a cool project to have with your kids or just any individual. But also, to feed that, just go grab some worms. And then, if you don't already buy a lot of vegetables, at least buy enough to feed something to your worms. Ideally, after eating some yourself, but I won't lie, I've already purchased cucumbers for my worms just because they're literally one of their favorite foods, and it's sort of crazy to watch them eat it. But it's just a fun thing. And if you get enough of it, it's something you can sell to people. But it is just a great project to have going. And I really am starting to see it as not a necessary, but an extremely advantageous process to have going for preppers and homesteaders. If you've got a compost pile going, unless you're being really sanitary with it, you probably have worms helping you. Probably not to the extent that I do, where, well, I'll show you. Where any one of my buckets is just almost crowded with worms. But they're great neighbors to each other. But in one of my buckets, you can pretty much guarantee that at any given point, they're all in there almost overcrowding the food to where you need to be feeding them pretty often. As opposed to in a lot of people's compost buckets, there's just a few worms here and there hanging out because they've migrated in. Now, mind you, all of these buckets have been freshly turned, which means the worms will usually go to the very bottom. Because what I've got here are European night crawlers. I say European because most North American worms are invasive from Europe. Well, yep, this one's pretty sleepy right now, so we're not seeing many worms. Now, the difference between European night crawlers and red wrigglers, which are pretty much the most popular worm farm worms, is that night crawlers like to go deep. They bury themselves deep inside their habitat. There's a guy. And sort of climb up and poke their heads up through to eat, and then return down to the bottom where they're comfortable. Whereas red wigglers, which you'll purchase online, yep, they're all hiding pretty good today. There's a few. Red wigglers tend to sort of hang around and climb up and down throughout their habitat. So when you open the top, they're sort of hanging out there. Whereas European night crawlers, like I said, burrow down to the bottom and poke their heads up to the point where, looking here at my grass, if we see the top of a really big worm, these guys will be 12, 16 inches long, and they'll be straight down into the ground that whole length. And they just poke their head up to breathe and to eat, and then slink back down and live the rest of their life there. In fact, during the winter, they'll live up to 5 or 6 feet underground throughout the winter under the frost line, just hanging out. So, point being, we're not going to see too many of my worms until I reharvest one of those buckets, but I'll be doing a video about how to make a worm bucket, and we may do a little bit of that tomorrow. But I figured I wanted to show you myself walking around and collecting some worms. Oh, this guy is escaping. Look at him. They do that. So I'll grab this bucket that I'm actually making a worm farm in and show you the worms that I've harvested today. Ooh, might as well have a little sippy while we're at it. So what I have here is sphagnum peat moss. It is not the prime home for them, but it is a home for them, and I'm doing some experimenting. So I'm going to dump some of it in here because I don't want to use it all in one farm. And what remains in there, which I have quadruple rinsed using a pillowcase, which we can talk about another time, should be some pretty nice bedding for my new worm slaves. They're not really slaves, they're being paid handsomely. But let's check them out. Plop. Oh, look at those guys. That's some worms right there. So, as you can see, I've been doing this a little bit today. Got a fair few dozen worms. I wouldn't be surprised if I got 100. There's a lot of small guys in there. And this coconut coir really hides them well. Anyways, that is the start of my next farm. I'm going to throw some garden mixed dirt with manure in it. A little bit of this coconut fiber mat, some leaves, and some partially composed organic matter from my composting starter bucket here. This sort of gets things going so that the worms are more prone to eating it. They don't really like fresh scraps. They like stuff that's had a little bit of mold growing on it, a little bit of fungus and bacteria growing. So I'll feed them a little bit out of there, make sure that they got some prime food to eat whenever they're done recuperating from this trauma I've put them through. And this bucket will become another prime worm farm. Anyway, stay tuned for a more in-depth video about all of this. Thank you for hanging around for this rambling discussion on the topic. Hope you're all doing well out there. Everybody, stay safe.